Good morning, Gamecock fans. It is Monday, April 28th, the year of our Lord 2025. This is Coffee with JC Shurburtt. Thanks for joining me this morning. Um, I hope you don't have a case of the Mondays like I maybe do today. I don't know. Gamecockland was not a super weekend, some disappointment on the Diamonds. Obviously, South Carolina baseball lost 2 of 3 to Kentucky. They didn't get swept, but and shout out to Will Tippett for hitting the game-winning home run in Game 2, a 5-4 win up in Lexington against the Kentucky Wildcats. Lost the first game of the series and then turned around and got really sloppy performance on Sunday in the field, 11-5. Kentucky wins the series and comes out the victor. This team is now 5-16 in the SEC. Only 3 series to go, so it's going to take a miracle now, folks, for them to even get on the bubble for the NCAA tournament, which is very, very disappointing on a number of levels. Um, I Benary said it, and I think we all felt it that this team, while not among the best South Carolina teams ever, given the resources that were sunk into the program over the summer, first and foremost, given Maneri's pedigree, that there would be, you know, a typical Gamecock baseball season when they didn't have the best team, but you felt like they milked every ounce of success out of the program or out of that year's team within the program as possible. That's just not happening. There's just a lot of bad things that happen to this team. Even when they win, it feels like a struggle. Haven't lost any mid majors, so I guess that's good. That's a bright spot. But the SEC's just been really tough on them. They've lost games all kinds of ways, and that's a sign of a bad team when you lose different types of ways. I always say a sign of a good team is when you can win different types of ways. You win close ones, you can blow people out, you can rally, you can survive adversity when a team comes back on you. None of those boxes really have been checked consistently with this team this year. But the other direction, absolutely. So we'll see what happens. But I said before the series, it's kind of do or die when you're, heading into with a 4-14 record. You got to at least win the series, if not sweep. And it was going to be a tall task anyway. And then, Sunday obviously just didn't. They just weren't competitive and made a lot of mistakes. So we'll see what happens. Softball, shockingly, uh, sitting there with a big lead, a 90-minute rain delay, and Auburn, which is unranked, rallies and wins game 1, and then pretty much throttles them in game 2. Gamecocks came back and salvaged one game out of the series with a 4-1 win on Sunday, but that didn't go well. And then finally, the NFL draft. I, it is what it is. It was surprising to me that only 5 players got drafted. I thought there would be more, especially in the later rounds. I've seen, players through the years come out of South Carolina and uh, get drafted, and maybe it was unexpected, so maybe it always balances out. But I don't. I think, folks, just to be transparently honest here, maybe I've sort of been in the Gamecock bubble a little bit, and I need to kind of spend more time watching other players and things like that because I didn't really understand, when you have a Rocket Sanders with the skill set he's got, and I know it's a deep year at running back. Running backs are um, undervalued a little bit. The position value there is a little lower, which is why I don't really understand taking Ashton Genty in the top 10, but that's okay. We'll see what happens with that one. But I thought Rocket, good hands. He's big. He's fast. Um, just digging in, I came across a scouting report. Maybe I should just defer to them. They kind of said some things about, Rocket. and his like natural ability as a running back, especially at first contact. I don't know. I've seen him run over people at first contact before, but in other words, finding the whole vision maybe a little bit. Uh, and I guess that lines up. I mean, Carolina's offensive line last year at times just missed blocks and a lot of stuff like that. But he signed with the Los Angeles Chargers, which drafted Amari and Hampton in the first round. Uh, Same place that Kyle Kennard got drafted, so he's heading to L.A. Torricelli Simpkins did not get drafted. I felt like he was, just looking at the projections and the grades and all that good stuff, I mean, you can't put too much into it. Mel Kiper obviously had Shadur Sanders way up there. That didn't work out. It's unpredictable, folks. It really is. But he was sort of borderline. I didn't expect Vershawn Lee or Boogie Huntley or Debo Williams to be drafted, or Bam Martin Scott to be drafted when all was said and done. DeAndre Jules. And I haven't gotten a lot of those. I don't know where most of them signed. Boogie did sign a free agent deal with Miami, the Dolphins. So he's going to go down there with Cam Smith, who is still on the Dolphins roster. And so that's good for him. Bam Martin Scott signed with the Carolina Panthers. Josh Simon, I don't know. It kind of my theory on that is, he weighed in at 239 pounds, and 239 looks a lot different than 241, even though it's a couple of pounds off, I think, mentally. So maybe his size sort of scared some people off. But, these days in the NFL, you have these hybrid types, receiver, tight end types. They still have to block. Maybe that was it. I don't know. I thought Josh Simon was a pretty good blocker. But he signs with the Falcons, and I think it's a good spot for him. Did not get drafted. Gilbert Edmonds signed, got invited to the rookie mini camp with the Chargers. And Vershawn got invited to 2 rookie mini camps with the Chicago Bears and Kansas City Chiefs. Those are your undrafted guys right now. And, of course, Nick Emmanwori. Now there's positive here. I'm a little, I guess I'll tell you that I was kind of hoping they would set the record this year because, heck, I like these guys. And I think some of them have been through a lot, guys like Tonka and Boogie have been through a coaching change and COVID and everything else at the University of South Carolina. So they've worked hard, persevered, stuck with the program, did not get on the first train out of town. And so you pull for people like that, right? So I guess I was kind of hoping that. I will say this, I'll point this out. Shane Beamer now, through his first 4 drafts, has had 17 players selected. That's more. Steve Spurrier had 12 for comparison's sake. I think I know Will Muschamp had 8. Will took over a bad situation with the roster. I'm sure had he and look, you got to give Will Muschamp credit too, because a lot of these guys drafted, not all of them, but a lot of the 17 during the time Beamer's been here, the majority of them have been Will Muschamp recruits. But you get credit for recruiting them, but then the staff that inherits them gets credit for getting them to the NFL, because what do I say all the time about football? The D word, it's developmental, right? So you got to give Beamer credit, and that's how I do it. Like Muschamp didn't have anybody drafted his first year when he took over for Spurrier, but Spurrier did. And even though Lou Holtz recruited Coach Simpson, for example, Spurrier gets credit for that. And so that's how you tally it up. This is kind of the rules of the tally, if you will. And recruiting is a separate category. So you can realistically say Muschamp recruited these guys, Beamer got them in. So Beamer counts NFL. So that's kind of a modern record. I can't go back. I'd have to go back. I can't imagine in like the 70s or 80s. We followed the draft pretty closely in the 80s that there were more than 17 over a first 4-year period coming from this school. So that's a positive in the right direction because obviously, like I've harped on for a while, you can sell this in recruiting. And it still matters. Like talking to G.A. Mangus the other day, we were kind of going through and I asked him about it. And, he did point out that things have changed and it's a lot about NIL money and money, money, money and stuff like that now. But, it still matters. Even in this era. I mean, look at Georgia. Georgia's a pretty popular place. Their numbers are always in double digits. They had another bunch of people drafted over the weekend, but it still matters in recruiting, and you want to do that. And it was very interesting because looking at this tweet from Brian Fisher, which was up on the Inside the Gamecocks Instagram page. I know Brian from way back. He's been a well-traveled journalist through the years. He's one of the ones out there I respect and like. The half the picks of the first 50, 24 of them were from like 6 schools: Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Georgia. Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Michigan, and South Carolina. So there you go. So, the Gamecocks were in that mix. I think 3 of the top 50 because Demetrius Knight Jr. went in the second round. Kyle Kennard, Tonka Hemingway. I mean, no, Demetrius Knight Jr. TJ Sanders. I'm sorry. Demetrius Knight Jr. and Tonka Hemingway all were top 50 picks. And then no, I'm sorry. Mondays, folks. TJ Sanders, Demetrius Knight Jr., and Nick Emmanwori all were top 50 picks. The order was Emmanwori, Sanders, and Knight. Okay. And then Tonka and Kyle went in the 4th round. Sorry. But anyway, King Guy said 3 of the top 50 right there. Two teams traded up to draft Nick and TJ. So that was a really positive type of deal. And, so South Carolina's right there in that 50% group with the national champion, the semifinalist Texas Longhorns, the 2023 national champs in Michigan, which had talent. They just didn't have a quarterback. The SEC champs, Georgia, and the Big Ten champs, Oregon. And all those schools do pretty well in the portal and high school recruiting. So that's a good thing right there with to be in that company. That's a nice little talking point, even if the overall numbers did not align with maybe the expectation. Maybe I set the wrong expectation. I'll take responsibility for that. I'll own it. My wife always tells me, if you screw up, own it. And I've lived my life that way. You folks know me. I'll fight, not fight, but I'll debate and argue until I run out of oxygen if I feel like I'm right. But if I realize I'm wrong, I'll admit it and own it and move on. And I was wrong about this draft class. I guess it's a fool's errand maybe to try to predict what these folks are doing in the front offices. And I thought overall it was a weird draft. And by weird, I mean this. I believe I mentioned this last week. I think that they're not a lot of like lock superstars, like guys that you go, yeah, he's a star in the NFL. Even Travis Hunter, to me, who I can go on and on about because his accomplishment at the college level was impressive. But, Jacksonville trading all the future away to get him, no, let the Browns can have him. I mean, because, you have to ask yourself, and maybe the answer is yes. Can he play Ironman football in the National Football League on Sundays? And if the answer is yes, then maybe, hey, it's a 2-for-1 roster deal, right? That in and of itself is valuable because when you're paying players, and doing budgets and you're limited to 47, that's a roster spot, right? You can kind of get some help somewhere else or depth somewhere else, ward against injuries, that kind of thing. But I think that's a big question. I mean, just like when you go from high school to the pros, high school to the pros, Mondays, high school to college, the speed of the game, the collisions, the physicality, just everything about it gets turned up to 10, right? It's up there. And everybody's ever played football will tell you that. Why do guys with all this talent, get to the NFL and bomb? And it's not just been guys that are really good, but maybe they can't learn the playbook at the NFL level, or not guys that are really good, but they're a little smaller for the NFL. There's all these exceptions in the NFL, and what it is in many cases, some guys just don't want any anymore. There just comes a point where it's like, this is too fast and too hard, and I'm getting the hell knocked out of me. And I just don't, I'll take my 20 million and go to the beach. And they play that way. And it's that way in high school. Guys are great in high school, and they get to college and they're like, oh God, it's different. It's a lot different. Same with middle school to high school, JV to varsity. It's just every time you go up a level, it's a different ball game, and you have a certain amount of attrition, no matter how good they are. Some guys are great athletes and star on the football field, middle school, maybe even get to C team or JV, and they get to varsity and they're like, oh shoot, they're really good at baseball or basketball. I'm just going to concentrate on this sport. I've had enough. Thank you. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's human nature. But that's kind of the key there. And that's the question I had about Travis Hunter is, you're taking a risk and then you have to evaluate him individually. Well, as a corner, in my opinion, he's size. He's not the biggest corner. He's elite, but he's not the biggest corner. Most NFL people think he's going to be a corner. With the ball in his hands at receiver, he's a slot. Those guys, position value. Corners do have high position value now, so maybe that's it. And I've said for a while, Bill King and I were talking about this one day, about at the college level, there's not a bunch of elite corners like there once was. It's weird. You'd think there would be, but you kind of look around college football, like who is an elite corner? And they're out there, don't get me wrong, but they're hard to find. It's not easy. There's kind of been a drought, if you will. So, Cam Ward, I don't think he's the number one overall pick. I hope he is. Great story. Cam Ward, going to be a millionaire. But I just didn't see it. Will, the offensive lineman from LSU, that guy, he's short arms. And he said, well, it doesn't matter if I have short arms or not, but it actually does. Again, extension, tackles, so there wasn't like this, star power. There's a reason Shedeur Sanders was being talked about as the number one pick in the draft, when I agree with most people, he's very, very above average and very good. Is he great as a player? Like, take everything else out of it. I just don't know. I just don't know. I think he can pass. Hell, he's a better passer than Caleb Williams was coming out, in my opinion. Like, as far as making all the throws, he can make all the throws. You hear that term, but I don't know. So Ashton, everybody had warts right in the early round. It was weird, and about the only guy that I liked that I was like, that's probably is Abdul Carter. Two guys, Abdul Carter and Walter Nolan. And you got the old, he takes plays off. And I guess they've looked at more film than I have, but every time I saw Walter Nolan, he was running sideline to sideline, tracking down backs 10 yards down the field. And that's actually what I liked about him. So it shows how much I know. But those were two that I thought, well, that's the, you know, I don't know. So anyway, but the Gamecocks did end up with a flurry of picks right there in rounds 2 and 4. Like I said, Nick Emmanwori goes to the Legion of Boom, the same franchise that lo and behold had Cam Chancellor, and that's who he gets to compare to a lot. Shout out to Kreger, who made that comparison the other day. I think Nick talked about it too in his press conference from the combine. A lot of people have made that comparison, but got to give a shout out to Kreger from the club chief down in Porch chat box that brought it up on the show the other day. And actually, I think said he could go to Seattle. They traded up to get him. I think that's a great fit. TJ Sanders gets drafted and goes into a great situation with Pat DeMarco's Buffalo Bills. The Bills got TJ Sanders and then took Deion Walker from Kentucky later. I have a little theory. I think they saw in the Super Bowl what can bring down the Kansas City Chiefs defensive line for the SEC, right? So good situation for him on a contender that a franchise that really is trying to get over the hump. The Bills, I feel bad for them in a certain way. They're building a nice new stadium up there, so I don't feel bad for them for that because that's going to be really nice. But they, I was, in high school when they lost 4 straight Super Bowls. There's a ESPN 30 for 30, the four falls of Buffalo. That's really good. Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, all those guys. Marv Levy, who I got to meet, fortunately, about 20 years ago at the Under Armour game. He was a coach, very good man. And they lost. And then now it's like they can't get past the Chiefs or whoever else. Last year it was the Ravens beat them. So was it the Ravens? No, it was the Chiefs. No, is it? No, yeah, they played the Chiefs this past year. The Ravens, I think, beat them the previous year or something. I don't know. I don't have it in front of me. It's Monday again. So great situation for him. And then Demetrius Knight Jr. going to the Cincinnati Bengals. What a tremendous story that is. And I would be lying to you if I didn't say I got a little emotional seeing his wife and kids. They're right there in the football building. And you think about the 1-year impact he made on the team in many, many ways at South Carolina. That's the world we live in now. I think with the transfer portal and guys that are there a short amount of time. That's what you want. You can't do anything about the fact there's a transfer portal or that you're going to sometimes have guys that are only there a season. What you want to do is maximize that season. And he's an example to get the most out of it. And Kyle Kennard as well. Demetrius Knight is on and off the field. And not that Kyle wasn't a leader and a tremendous addition character-wise, because he was. But Kyle Kennard was another example of that. Best season of football at South Carolina. That's a smart goal to have. It's like Nick Saban always said, we don't make the rules, but what we're going to do is use the rules to our advantage. And I think that's what Shane Beamer kind of preaches with his program. So Kyle Kennard goes to the Chargers. Good situation for him, playing for Jim Harbaugh, who's a winner. And Jim Harbaugh, just as awkward as always on the phone yesterday. But that was a good situation. And I wonder if I'd be surprised if he drove to Los Angeles. But that was kind of the social media from the Gamecock football account. He was getting his car drive. It's a long way, a long drive. So we'll see sort of what happens there. But I think that's a good situation. Then Tonka Hemingway is going to Sin City. Pete Carroll takes him for the Las Vegas Raiders. So that's good. Looking forward to seeing him in the silver and black. Obviously a player that has NFL bloodlines because of his brother and a tremendous asset to the program through the year. So here's the question. Draft is in the books. So so I'm going to, 5 drafted. Who replaces these guys is the big question. And I'm not sure that in some instances, either because of talent, rareness, or production, that's going to necessarily happen, with newcomer slash guy that didn't start last year on the current roster. In other words, I don't think there's another guy just exactly like Kyle Kennard that's going to get 11.5 sacks on the roster right now. But I say this a lot, every player is different. And so you may not be Kyle Kennard, right? But you can be Desmond Umazulu and be good. You just use different strengths and weaknesses, and it happens all the time. There's not a team in the country, folks, that clones their players and is like, oh, this guy's this guy and this guy's this guy, and he's just going to step in. Because every player is, unique. There are similarities. There are player comparisons to be made, which I find myself making more and more these days because of you folks. You ask for them, you like them, fans like them. I like them as a fan when I look, because it gives me kind of a mental picture. But, the reality is every player is different. So, let's start with the last guy. Let's start with Tonka. You can't replace Tonka. There's nobody that maybe Devontae Miles is that type of guy, but Tonka's his rarity as an interior guy. I don't want to say he's finesse, but he's not. But he uses his quickness and athleticism, and is really a great pass rusher. From the defensive line position. I don't know what the Raiders' defensive scheme is, but I think inside beating a guard one-on-one, using technique, moves, athletic ability, long arms. That's what that guy is. So I don't know that you have a guy like that right now. Will you in time through recruiting? Yeah, I actually think if they get Aiden Harris from Charlotte, the 4-star, he's a top 50 guy in the country. And his brother Andrew is also a recruit. I think that's Tonka Hemingway, essentially. He's about the same size Tonka was coming out, kind of the same game, that kind of thing. But for this year's team, now I think one of 3, Monkel Goodwine, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, and Nick Barrett will start. I'm kind of on the Brownlow-Dindy and Goodwine train. Hale McGranahan from thebigspur.com kind of feels he's on the Nick Barrett train. And that's a good thing, because if you're talking about like, well, this guy, they're all good enough to start, that's a 3-man rotation. It's a good place to start. TJ Sanders, looking back on him, I don't know that you can replace that level of consistency and that kind of player, inside. He was really good last year. Played his best ball at the end. And remember that, though. Play your best ball at the end. Nothing says one of these guys, just like TJ coming into this past year, had not been the most consistent, flashed big time in that Georgia game, that would kind of disappear. Can they get some consistency? Can that be a good one? Can it be a Brownlow-Dindy? That type of deal. So I would say, it's hard to replace, that type of performance, but can it be done? Yeah. Can it be done? And look, will Nick Barrett turn into a 2nd-round pick? I don't know. Brownlow-Dindy 2nd-round pick? I don't know. But can they get a guy on the inside? Can one of those guys on the inside, or if they get someone from the transfer portal, can those guys be, a hellacious defensive tackle this year? Yeah, it can happen. I emphasize the word can. So there's that. Kyle Kennard, I mentioned replacing him in the aggregate production wise. I think they have good pass rushers. I just don't know about playing the run like he did. I'd have to see it. I think Desmond Umazulu making the strides he's made in the weight room is big. I think JT Gear is capable. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is obviously an older player that the staff loves, that's played a lot of football. That's four. You know, I think sacks wise, you can, I mean, between those three and Dylan Stewart, I think, you can replace the sack numbers. I think South Carolina will be able to rush the passer. The issue that could happen, is are you going to be able to get to passing downs frequently, because are you going to let teams set up second and short and things like that are annoying to defensive coordinators because it's harder to call. I don't know. I think we'll see. There's a chance though, and that's not an uncommon answer for most off seasons. You know, it's it's just the reality. I mean, we can sit here all we want and say, but this guy and but that guy and but this guy, and every fan base does it, and a lot of people do it. Um, I'll do it, but this guy, but that guy, but you don't know until you know. You don't know until you know. So there's that. Demetrius Knight Jr., no way you can replace the leadership, but you got to have leaders, and there's leaders emerging on the team. It just may not be at linebacker. Can they replace his speed and performance? Yes. Yes. I think there's enough talent at linebacker. It's young. They're not old like he is. So, but keep in mind too, Demetrius Knight Jr., when he came to South Carolina, only spent 1 year at linebacker. That was at Charlotte. Now he kind of took to it like a fish takes to water. He was all conference, but he hadn't played a bunch of linebacker in the SEC before he got to South Carolina, and only played 1 year at linebacker. So, yeah, he got coached up and took the coaching, and that's going to be the key for Justin Okoronkwo and Sean Murphy and Fred Johnson at the linebacker position, little Jerron Willis, So I think they can replace that there. You're not going to replace Nick Emmanwori as far as the freak. Can you get a guy that can cover and support the run, though? Can you develop that guy? Peyton Williams was the most improved player of the spring. It looks like he's got the inside track to that job. Can always move Jelon Kilgore back. I think I think they can kind of replace his production. What's scary again is that Nick was so good in the run game. We kind of look at defensive backs in terms of pass defense and interceptions and all that, but he was a closer in the run game, and it's a prevention type. That's why they call it a safety. It's for safety reasons that you put guys back there and have them come up and play the run. And his all 3 years he played at Carolina, he was great against the run. Just was not scared. And for a 6'4" guy to get that kind of leverage and be that good a tackler is crazy. But there's a reason you recruit, and the reason that you got all these pieces in the defensive backfield. And Peyton Williams has played well most of the time he's been in there. And it's his time to step up, so you just hope that he can step up and man that position well. You got DQ Smith back there. He's Jamie Bradford's breakout player of the year, similar to when he said that about O'Donnell Fortune last season. By the way, I don't have, as of right now, any place that O'Donnell Fortune has signed as a free agent. So, so there's that. But so, it's kind of a mixed bag as far as replacing the five guys there. I think that they're not done in the portal yet. I mentioned the offensive linemen. I think they, there's probably a couple of more names you'll see pop up offensive line wise, just for numbers' sake. Then, of course, there's defensive tackle. So we'll see sort of what happens with that. The roster's 98% of the way there. Hated to see Rondarius Porter walk out the door and go to the transfer portal. I thought he was going to play. So that's kind of, that was kind of disappointing. You don't want to lose anybody that you're counting on to rotate in depth at any position. But I think Porter can go start somewhere. He and his brother both. So we'll see where they end up. Emory Floyd ended up back with Dowell Loggins at App State. He visited and signed there. A lot of players visiting App State. So Dowell Loggins is taking advantage of that South Carolina pipeline, sort of like he did with Arkansas. Trey Knox, Rocket Sanders, Dowell had a lot to do with those guys coming to the Gamecocks from the Arkansas Razorbacks. So we'll see what happens there. All right, the morning show will be along. John Whittle's back from Lexington, Kentucky, and the baseball series, and he'll talk that. Mike Morgan's in. I'm sure they'll talk a bunch of draft. They're going to talk Shitter, Sanders, and all that to death. Phil and I will be along afterward, talk more about that stuff, house settlement, recruiting, lots of good recruiting talk to be had here in the coming weeks as we move towards May and the official visit season and all that good stuff. It's probably going to be a lot of what we talk about that and maybe some historical perspective type of stuff because, the news is going to come and go during the off season. All right, folks, this has been Coffee. Thanks for tuning in today. That's JC Shurburtt. Be sure to catch the show, the morning show, coming up later here at Chief Sports South Carolina. Like, subscribe, share. If you're on YouTube, if you're on podcast version, please go to the Apple Podcast and rate us 5 stars. Holla at you soon.